Good morning again to everybody, and thank you for having joined us today for this online event. Before starting with the content of the guidance, let's try to put this event into context. In this slide, you can see an overview of the chronology of the process for updating the guidance. The last step was the publication of the guidance in July, which included one annex, the Annex A, in which all the comments received during the public consultation were addressed. Then you may ask, why are we here today? Because the implementation date of the guidance was this past Sunday, 1st December. The meaning of the implementation date is that dossiers received after that date will need to be compliant with the requirements of the new guidance. For those dossiers submitted before, the previous requirements will apply, but with some flexibility, meaning that if any of the conditions established in the new document, like the number of studies, will be in favor of the applicant, those could still be applied to those dossiers. Now, let's try to move forward to the content of the guidance. In this slide, you can see the table of contents of the guidance. We will follow the same structure during the current presentation. Regarding the introduction, let's focus on the scope of the guidance. As many of you already know, the guidance cannot cover the 100% of all the potential situations that could be present in every dossier for all types of additives and study designs. It is conceived to cover the most common situations based on the previous experience and leaving always some room for effects or alternatives not considered in the document. Indeed, you will see that in many of the categories there is always a group to consider other effects. Therefore, it is crucial that the dossier includes a clear explanation of the rationale followed for the proposed classification of the additive, the intended effect, the type and number of studies presented, the endpoints measured, and the conclusions reached based on these results. Please include the justification in the dossier and don't wait for us to ask for clarifications in an additional data request. Obviously, all this becomes especially relevant if there is any deviation from the requirements of the guidance. The next point in the guidance will be the general principles of the efficacy assessment. Some of the aspects mentioned in this section might be repeated later in the document, and we will try to stress them more during the presentation. The aim here is to highlight the most relevant aspects from the point of view of the FEEDAP panel to be considered regarding the demonstration of the efficacy. The first step will be to properly define the category and the functional group to which your additive belongs. It might be that similar additives are classified differently, and this may also depend on the strategy that you, as applicants, may want to follow. In this sense, our advice is that you focus on the intended effect you wish to demonstrate, and then select the most appropriate category and functional group. The main points to be considered are: studies should be based on the additive under assessment. Is it possible to use reference to published studies? Yes. Indeed, there is a specific section in the guidance regarding literature studies, but the active substance of the agent in those studies should be the same to that under application. The efficacy should be investigated by comparing the lowest recommended use level with an appropriate control group, meaning either a negative control or a positive control, depending on the study design. The efficacy should be supported by independent studies showing statistically significant effects on key endpoints related to the expected impact of the additive. Here, as you may have realized, we have removed the definition included in the previous document of independence. In this case, we refer specifically to statistical independence. Studies should be performed according to farming practices and animal welfare rules in the EU. Remember, the efficacy of the additive is relevant within the context of the animal production system of the EU, where it will be authorized and marketed. Therefore, the efficacy should be demonstrated within this context. Apart from that, evidence should be provided that the trials have been performed following externally audited quality assurance SEMS, like ISO, GLP, or any similar standards. Regarding the next point, the dossier is what is used for the assessment. Therefore, it is essential to adequately report and document the information, and, as far as possible, to standardize the reporting within the same application. Please make that effort because it facilitates the assessment very much. Finally, please pay attention to the potential interactions of the additive which may affect the efficacy. One of the most obvious ones is the one referred to in the guidance regarding the compatibility of microorganisms with other potential antimicrobial substances present in the feed. Okay, let's move to the specific requirements for the different categories of additive. Once it is clear to which category and functional group I want my additive to be classified, let's see which type of study and how many I will need to perform. In this slide, there is an overview of the categories of additive with the corresponding functional groups. Here, we have included the list as it is shown in Regulation 1931. As you may realize, the structure followed in the guidance is very similar, except for the zootechnical additives. We'll comment on that later on. Please consider that during the presentation, we will not discuss the definition of each of the categories and functional group. We consider this is not the scope of the presentation. Instead, we will focus on the intended effects and the required studies in each case. Technological additives affecting the feed. So, what is needed in this case? As a general rule, at least 3 in vitro studies on the feed in a representative range of feeds, which will depend on the claim. For example, if the additive is intended to be used in a specific type of feed, let's say a thickener additive for liquid feeds for pigs, 3 liquid feeds typically used in pig production may suffice. Instead, if the application is for all types of feeds, it might be better to test 3 different feeds covering different species and formats. In Table 1, you can see the expected endpoints for each of the functional groups considered in this category. In this case, the link between the functional group, the intended effect, and the endpoints is pretty straightforward. Besides, one important thing is that it is possible that there is no need for efficacy demonstration, always that the product has already been authorized for use in food, and a similar effect is expected in feed. In this case, the matrix is essential, meaning that the matrix for which the additive is authorized in food should be similar to that of feed. If there are doubts, evidence of the similarities between both matrices should be provided. We will try to give more insights about 2 or 3 particular types of additives within this category. Also, because these are the ones in which more novelties were introduced with respect to the previous guidance. First, silage additives. Here again, it's crucial that the substrate to which the additive will be added is clearly defined, in this case in terms of dry matter, water-soluble content, and botanical origin. And then, the trial should adequately cover the characteristics of this substrate. Instead, if the aim is to authorize the product in all types of fresh materials, then one study in each of the categories established in Regulation 429 should be provided. For silage additives, 4 claims are possible. The general one will be the improvement of the silage production or preservation of nutrients. One difference with the previous guidance is that here it is clearly specified that the efficacy will be considered proven if at least there is an improvement in terms of the dry matter loss or the ammonia production, together with another of the required endpoints. The other claims will be the improvement of the aerobic stability, the reduction of effluents, and the reduction of a specific microorganism. In those cases, the specific corresponding endpoint should be addressed. Second, the aging condition enhancers, for which some conditions are included in the guidance for the first time. When reviewing the criteria, it was considered appropriate that this section could cover both preservatives and aging condition enhancers, as most of the requirements were common. Indeed, the differences, according to the legal definition, are basically related to the type of microorganism. In the case of preservatives, will be spoiling microorganisms, while for aging condition enhancers, it will be microorganisms relevant to feed safety. And the second one is the moment the additive is added to the feed. For preservatives, the additive is expected to be present in the feed before the contamination with the microbe, while in the other case, this is to be added once the contamination with the microorganism is already present. However, in terms of demonstration of efficacy, in both cases, the additive and the microorganism can be added to the feed simultaneously. Also, within the technological additives, we found 2 in which the effect is expected to be seen in the animal, not in the feed. Substances for the reduction of the contamination with mycotoxins or with radionuclides. In both cases, in vivo studies are needed. At least 3 for the group covering mycotoxins and 1 should be enough for the ones targeting radionuclides. The studies can be short-term trials, meaning that there is no minimum duration to be respected. Later, my colleague Alberto will give some more insights regarding the concept of long versus short-term studies. The main aspects of the design will be similar between the two groups, and some special conditions for the extrapolation are included in the guidance for this subcategory of additives, which follow a similar approach to the one included in the guidance on the safety for the targeted species. For instance, in these cases, when two different species are to be covered, 3 studies covering both growing and reproductive animals will suffice. For all terrestrial animals, only 1 study in a major species of poultry, pigs, and ruminant will be needed, complemented by 1 in salmonids if aquatic species are also to be covered. Then we can move to the sensory additives, in which we have again 2 subgroups, the colorants and the flavorings. For colorants, we can again differentiate between the ones in which the effect is expected to be seen in the feed, to add or restore the color, or in the animal, or animal-derived food products. For the first ones, the same rule applies. At least 3 in vitro studies in a representative range of feeds according to the intended use. We included here a remark for the need to submit studies. Although the effect may seem obvious, please remember that the studies showing the coloring effect in feed are needed. And the coloring effect should be measured using appropriate methodologies. In the other cases, 3 in vivo studies per species and category won't be needed. In both cases, there will be no need for efficacy demonstration if the product is already authorized for use in food and a similar effect is expected at a similar level in feed. For the second subgroup of sensory additives, the flavorings, the aim here is to demonstrate the presence of flavoring properties in the additive or the active substance. For that purpose, 3 options are considered: reference to literature, in vitro studies with a sensory panel or electronic nose, or if a palatability claim is included, then at least 3 in vivo trials are needed per each species and category. The next group of additives we enter are the nutritional ones. For this category, there will be no need for the demonstration of efficacy for amino acids and their salts, urea, vitamins and provitamins, and compounds of trace elements, always that those are already authorized under Regulation 1831. When this is not the case, at least 1 in vivo study will be needed. Doubt: can this study be performed in any species or category? In general, yes. Also, considering laboratory animals. However, if the additive is specifically designed to be efficacious in a particular animal species or category, the same targeted species should be selected. For instance, if you aim to authorize a protected amino acid for ruminants, a study in ruminants is expected. The next question then will be, which type of study is needed? This will depend on the nature of the substance. In the guidance, 3 options are provided. First, amino acid analogs, urea derivatives, and new forms of compounds of trace elements. In these cases, a bioavailability or a bioequivalence study will be needed. My colleague Alberto will provide later more input about these studies in the second part of the presentation. Second, chemically well-defined substances having similar effects to vitamins. The selection of short or long-term studies and the endpoints measured will depend on the nature and expected effect. And finally, for other nutritional additives, at least 1 long-term efficacy study should be provided. This option is left open in case novel nutritional additives are proposed. The next category in the list will be the exochemical additives. As we have been commenting during the presentation, and it has been reflected in the updated document, there is a mismatch between the functional groups and the intended effect. Because of that, the assessment in this case will focus on the effect. As a general rule, in this case, at least 3 in vivo studies per species and category of animals are needed. The type of study will depend on the nature of the additive and the intended effect. First, if the aim is to improve animal production or performance, long-term trials are requested. For those not so familiar with the process, we can clarify that the general approach is that this is the effect to be demonstrated for additives submitted within the functional groups of digestibility enhancers or gut flora stabilizers. The only exception will be the enzymes, for which the panel, apart from the fact of accepting short-term trials, for the first time in the guidance, it has been opened the possibility of accepting a combination of in vitro and in vivo trials to demonstrate efficacy. For the groups of additives affecting the characteristics of animal-derived foods or any other effects, the choice of long or short-term trials and the endpoints to be measured are left open and should be appropriately justified. For the other two groups within this category, we will develop a bit more in detail, as are the ones in which more changes were applied. On the one side, we have the additives favorably affecting the environmental consequences of animal production. Within this group, we consider 3 different claims, and depending on it, a different type of trial. First, additives reducing the output of nitrogen, phosphorus, or trace elements to the environment. In this case, short-term balance studies can be submitted. The rationale behind is similar to that of the enzymes. Second, for additives aimed at reducing the production of methane and other greenhouse gases, instead, long-term trials are necessary. The reason is that in this case, the trials should be able to assess the potential side effects of the additive on the zootechnical parameters and to consider the possibility of an adaptive response to the additive. Third, for additives intended to reduce the odor, short-term might be fine, but at least one long-term trial is considered necessary, also because of the adaptive response. Again, in this case, it is included the option for other effects not covered by the 3 main claims. On the other side, we have the additives affecting animal welfare. Here we can consider 2 potential groups of effects, those aimed at improving the so-called positive welfare, and the ones improving the stress resilience. We will focus on the second group of effects, in which the novelty of the updated guidance is the inclusion of the possibility of applying stressing factors to the animals. But consider that these stressing factors should represent realistic situations of the animal's life or production cycle. In the guidance, some examples are included, such as the heat stress or transport. It does not mean that the challenges accepted are restricted to those. As commented during the public consultation, the panel does not propose or limit the stressors challenges. However, it is also considered that feed additives are not intended to compensate for poor aging conditions or poor animal health. Apart from this, the link between the stressors, the endpoints monitor, and the claim effect of the additive should be clearly established and in line with the conditions of use. The endpoints can be physiological, behavioral, or immunological, alone or in combination, always depending on the claim and the nature of the additive. Finally, we reach the last category of additives, the coccidostats and histomonads. For this category, 2 types of trials are necessary, each of them with a different scope. For the floor pen or the battery cage studies, the aim is to demonstrate that the additive is efficacious when used at the specified conditions of use during the standard production cycle of the animals, and that it does not impact the zootechnical performance. In the case of the anticoccidial sensitivity test, the aim is to demonstrate the sensitivity of the strains to the product. For that reason, this type of trial is the only one which is later requested during the renewal applications, to ensure there is no resistance created during the period of the authorization. Based on the different scopes, the duration of the trials is expected to be different. Long-term for the floor pen or battery cages, and short-term for the ASTs. Also, due to the interest in checking the sensitivity of the strains, the ASTs should be performed within 2 years before the submission, while the others can be up to 5 years. How many studies in this case? At least 3 studies of each type are needed. Keep in mind that in both cases, an artificial infection is required. The inocula needs to be obtained from different regions of the EU to demonstrate they are unrelated, needs to be characterized by molecular methods, and virulence tests should also be submitted for each of the inoculums. And with this, I finish my part of the presentation and will give the floor to my colleague Alberto. Thank you for the attention.
After the overview provided by my colleague Jordi on the requirements per feed additive category, let's have a look now at the number of in vivo studies that are needed. This information can be found in section 4 of the efficacy guidance. In general, for food-producing animals, the number of in vivo studies required depend on the number of target species and/or categories for which the application is intended. In applications for a single animal category, the general rule of 3 studies showing positive effects applies, except for some nutritional additives and substances to control radionuclide contamination, for which just 1 study is needed, and also for coccidiostads, where 3 fluorpen studies and 3 anticoccidial sensitivity tests are needed. If the application aims to cover multiple categories within the same species, we have 2 scenarios. Extension is possible when both categories are in a similar physiological or production stage. For example, conclusions on chickens for fattening can be extended to chickens reared for laying or breeding. However, no extension is possible from one category to another at different production stages. For example, conclusions on chickens for fattening cannot be extended to laying hens, unless the claim effect is the same in both categories. In that case, one more study might be needed to establish the minimum efficacy level of the additive in the other category. Finally, when multiple species are intended, the FEEDAP panel acknowledges that it is unfeasible to perform studies in all potential target species, and therefore extrapolations are considered. On the one hand, in case the target species are physiologically related, animals are kept for the same purpose, and the effect of the additive is the same, the mode of action could be presumed. A list of potential extrapolations is provided in Table 4 of the guidance. On the other hand, for applications covering multiple species and categories, not necessarily physiologically related, but with the same intended effect, Table 5 provides a list of minimum number of studies required. In the current slide, we can see the cited tables. Table 4 for physiologically related species where the potential extrapolations from a major to another major or minor species are listed, and Table 5 that provides the minimum number of studies required for applications covering multiple species and categories. The rationale is that as the number of species categories increase, the total number of studies required would also increase. However, in relative terms, per unit of species, the number of studies would decrease. We would like to stress the fact that the FEEDAP panel has made an effort to reduce the requirements in the number of studies to demonstrate efficacy, in an attempt to comply with the 3 R's principle and the animal welfare regulations. Additionally, provisions have been included for the first time for bees and insects to respond to the increasing number of applications received. Let's see 3 examples to illustrate the reduction in the requirements on the number of studies. For all poultry applications, the previous guidance established that 3 studies in chickens for fattening and 3 studies in laying hens were needed. In the new version of the guidance, only 2 studies on chickens for fattening and 2 in laying hens are requested. That is a reduction from 6 to 4 studies. If the application covers all growing ruminants, the previous guidance requested 3 studies in calves and 3 in cattle for fattening, whereas in the new guidance the requirements are just 3 studies covering both calves and cattle for fattening. That is a reduction from 6 studies to only 3. In applications intended for all terrestrial species, the provisions of the previous guidance were that 18 studies were needed, covering chickens for fattening, laying hens, weaned piglets, sows, calves, and dairy cows. Instead, in the new guidance, only 9 studies are needed covering the same species, and 3 more if insects are aimed too. We have seen the requirements for food-producing animals, but what about pets and non-food-producing animals? For pets, we may face 2 possibilities. A first one in which the efficacy of the additive has been already demonstrated in food-producing animals and the same effect is expected in pets. In that case, only 1 study demonstrated efficacy per pet species is required, with a maximum of 3 studies in non-food producing animals for applications for all pets. But there are 2 exemptions. For ornamental birds applications, no studies would be needed if the additive was proved to be efficacious in chickens for fattening or laying hens. Similarly, for ornamental fish applications, no study would be needed if the additives were efficacious in salmonids or finfish. The second possibility would be when the additive has not been proved to be efficacious in food-producing animals or the expected effect in pets is different. In that case, the general rule of 3 studies applies. When 2 species are aimed, for instance cats and dogs, 4 studies would be needed to cover both species. And if the application covers all pets, 4 studies covering both cats and dogs plus 1 additional study with another species would be needed. Now, let's have a look at the general requirements on in vivo studies. This information can be found in Section 5 of the Efficacy Guidance. The guidance provides indications and suggestions on how in vivo studies should be designed, planned, executed, and reported in the subsection shown in the slide, and include the route of delivery of the additive, either via feed or water or both, and how the estimation from one to the other should be made. Also, some notes regarding the experimental groups are given. In general, experiments should consider a control group or untreated and a treated group at the minimum proposed level. In some cases, additional groups can be used, such as positive controls for bioequivalence studies. Also, Section 5 provides indications on the animals used in the experiments. They should be healthy and homogeneous. Husbandry and welfare should follow the regulations in place in the European Union. This also applies for studies conducted outside the European Union. The guidance provides also indications around endpoints that should be considered, as well as some statistical consideration covering the design of the experiment, sample size calculation, and the statistical analysis to be performed. Without entering into details, the novelties in Section 5 of the guidance can be summarized as follows. The new guidance introduced some indications on the health of the animals used in efficacy studies. Now, a veterinary report certifying that the animals were healthy at the start of the study is required. Logically, veterinary treatments are to be avoided, but in any case, they should not affect the mode of action of the additive. Also, the guidance has introduced the requirement to provide an ethical committee certificate. This certificate should clearly confirm the compliance with the animal welfare and husbandry regulations in the European Union. This is to ensure that the European farming management standards are met. Regarding the design of the experiments, the guidance highlights the fact that different production systems may occur in the European Union. The applicant should take that variation into account so that the efficacy of the additive is assessed under different scenarios. Finally, the use of orthogonal contrast are encouraged to compare the minimum proposed level versus the control group. Let's move now to the type of in vivo studies that can be carried out, long-term studies or short-term studies. Long-term studies are particularly suitable for assessing the effect of the additives on zootechnical parameters. The guidance provides a non-exhaustive list of endpoints for zootechnical performance, environmental effects, fecal consistency, and welfare. Table 6 also provides the requirements on the minimum duration and starting points of these experiments. For species not listed in Table 6, the general approach is that the minimum duration of 42 days is recommended for growing animals and 56 days for adult animals. For minor species not listed in Table 6, it is recommended to use similar durations as those indicated in a similar major species. In the event of additives with conditions of use shorter than the indicated durations in the table, the additive will be supplemented following those conditions of use, but a minimum observation period of 28 days is requested. Short-term studies are those that use shorter durations than the ones indicated in Table 6. They are particularly suitable for bioavailability studies in which the absorption and transport of the active substance to the target tissue of the animal is evaluated, or bioequivalence studies where the in vivo similarity between two different additives is assessed. Short-term studies can also be used to evaluate the digestibility of nutrients as influenced by the additive under assessment, including apparent or true digestibility or fecal and allele digestibility. Nevertheless, digestibility studies are discouraged in fish or by using cannulated animals. The adaptation period should be at least 14 days in ruminants and 7 days in other species, followed by a excreta collection period of 5 days for all species. Digestibility studies in laying hens, dairy cows, or sows should also measure the product output in eggs, milk, or the litter. Additionally, digestibility studies in sows should include gestating and lactating sows. Short-term studies can also be used for palatability or preference studies. Now, let's have a look to the requirements suggested for the in vitro studies. That information can be found in Section 6 of the efficacy guidance. In vitro studies are aimed for additives that exert their effect in the feed and should be performed with laboratory-based methods. For the suitability of this type of studies, the following recommendations should be followed, providing always the certificate of analysis of the test item. The study should cover a representative range of feeds, which could include feed materials alone, compound feed, or complementary feed. So, for instance, if the additive is intended for use in feed for all species, it should be tested in feeds formulated for a wide range of species. For instance, dairy cows, chickens for fattening, laying hens, pigs, etc. Additionally, a confidence level of 95% is recommended to compare the control group and the treated group at the minimum proposed level. For these comparisons, the use of parametric tests is preferred, although non-parametric tests may also be used when the number of observations is limited. Finally, at least 4 replicates per group are recommended. Just to conclude, Section 7 of the guidance provides indications on how the reporting should be done. As you can see on the left of the slide, the general index of the study report remains the same as in the previous version of the guidance. The information provided should be as clear, detailed, and complete as possible to facilitate the experts' appropriate assessment of the study. All the data should be easily accessible, and it is recommended that the report of each study starts with the trial protocol datasheet. The reporting of studies that share a similar design should also be reported following a similar structure. It is also encouraged to submit the raw data of the studies in a way that can be reviewed and edited, that is, for example, with Excel files. And with this, we have completed the overview of the update of the guidance on the assessment of efficacy of feed additives. Thank you for your attention, and I will give the floor to my colleague Oscar González.
As we near the end of the talks, I would like to take a moment to remind you of the various services that EFSA has in place to support applicants during the life cycle of a feed additive application, and in particular, how to submit questions and ask for clarifications to EFSA. The services are listed in the catalog and cover the complete life cycle of an application, starting with the pre-submission phase, the completeness check, the risk assessment, and the post-adoption phase. This comprehensive approach ensures that applicants have access to the support they need at each stage of the process. In fact, this info session itself is an example of these services. Today, you have the chance to submit your questions about the updated feed efficacy guidance document and will be replied live during the Q&A session. However, I want to emphasize that the possibility of submitting questions to EFSA is always open, even when you are at the very beginning of the preparation of your feed additive application. So in the following slides, We are presenting first the services available before submitting your application, and afterwards, those available after the submission. We have two dedicated services to respond to your questions. The General Pre-Submission Advice Service, which provides guidance on the rules applicable to an application and its content, and the Ask a Question service, which covers other types of questions, such as procedural steps and the IT tools that you need to use. Both these services can be requested through the Connect EFSA platform. After logging into your account, you can address your questions via the General Pre-Submission Advice or Ask a Question service by following the indications in the links available on the slide. In recent months, EFSA has introduced its services tailored to cover the needs of SME applicants. For example, if a small and medium-sized enterprise submits a query to the Ask a Question service, the reply will be provided within half the standard timeline. Similarly, if an SME submits a request for General Pre-Submission Advice, the reply will also be provided within half the standard timeline, and in a telemeeting instead of written form. Of course, the content of the GPSA replies provided in a meeting are essentially the same as those that would be provided in written form. But during the meeting, EFSA can ensure that the replies are properly understood by offering additional clarifications if deemed necessary. Finally, EFSA has introduced a dedicated support on the use of IT tools for preparing an application, consisting of a physical or virtual sign-on session in the use of IT tools such as Connect EFSA, for example, to notify studies or to request a GPSA, or in ESFC, the submission platform for FEEDAP applications. This support is designed to help you navigate the technical aspects of the application process and ensure that you have the skills and knowledge you need to submit your application. But also, after submission, applicants can interact with EFSA at different stages. During the completeness check phase, if you encounter difficulties understanding the information requested by the FDP unit before declaring your application valid, you can request a clarification teleconference to meet with the EFSA officers in charge of your application in Team Application Food Chain. An equivalent service is available during the risk assessment phase. So if you need clarifications on the information required by EFSA in an additional data request, in short an ADR, you can also request a clarification teleconference to meet with the corresponding officers in Team Feed at the FEEDCO unit. Finally, if after adoption of the opinion you need clarifications on the scientific rationale, the recommendations, and the resources of evidence supporting the outcome, you can request a post-adoption teleconference. To sum up, you're invited to contact EFSA at any point of the life cycle of your application using the different services available to have your doubt solved. And if you struggle to understand which service best fits your specific needs, just contact us via Ask a Question. I would like to conclude my talk with an invitation to participate in the EFSA call for expressions of interest to join its new stakeholder community on applications for regulated products, including feed additives. You can find all the details, such as the call text and the link to register, by scanning the QR code on the slide. The goal is to build a community of members with expertise and professional interest on application-related matters. In particular, the members of this community will have an active role in proposing topics for discussion and in sharing proposals and possible initiatives to improve the support to applicants at the various stages of the application lifecycle. And after this slide, I pass the floor again to the chair. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions and feedback.